It's a warm Friday night in the summer of 1957. You've got the whole family loaded into the station wagon, kids in pajamas piled in the back seat, a paper bag full of home-popped popcorn wedged between the seats, and the windows already rolled halfway down before you've even pulled out of the driveway. You turn off the main road, follow a string of red taillights down a gravel path, and a teenager with a flashlight waves you into your spot. You kill the engine. You hook a little metal speaker over the window. And then, as the last light fades out of the western sky, a massive screen, bigger than anything you've ever seen indoors, flickers to life right in front of you. No dress code. No babysitter. No shushing. Just your family, your car, and the movies. That, right there, was the drive-in theater. And for about 30 years, it was one of the most purely American things you could do on a summer night. Today, there are fewer than 300 of them left in the entire country. At their peak, in 1958, there were over 4,000. So what happened? How did something so beloved, so woven into the fabric of everyday American life, almost completely disappear? The answer isn't simple. It never is when something truly cultural fades away. It was a slow unraveling, pulled apart by economics, technology, legislation, and the relentless march of suburban sprawl. But to understand how they fell, we have to first understand just how completely they captured the American imagination when they were at their best. The very first drive-in opened in Camden, New Jersey, in June of 1933. A man named Richard Hollingshead Jr. nailed a screen to some trees in his backyard, mounted a projector on his car hood, and charged 25 cents a person. He had a simple idea, that people didn't want to get dressed up and sit in a stuffy theater. They wanted to be comfortable. They wanted to be themselves. And he was right. The concept spread slowly through the 30s and 40s, then absolutely exploded in the post-war boom of the late 40s and 50s. By 1948, there were fewer than 1,000 drive-ins nationwide. Just 10 years later, that number had more than quadrupled. The timing was almost perfect. Returning veterans were buying homes in the suburbs, starting families, and purchasing automobiles at a rate the country had never seen before. The drive-in was built precisely for that life. It sat at the outer edge of town on cheap, flat land, usually 10 acres or more, and it charged a flat rate per carload. Not per person. Per car. You could squeeze in 8 people and it didn't cost you a cent more. For a family with 4 kids in 1955, that was an extraordinary deal. And then there was the experience itself, which was unlike anything else going on in American entertainment at the time. Indoor theaters were formal places. You wore something decent. You sat still. You kept your voice down. The drive-in had none of those rules. You were in your own private bubble. You could talk, laugh, argue about the plot, let the baby sleep, let the dog sit on the seat next to you, eat whatever you brought from home, and nobody cared. The freedom of it was genuinely radical for the era. Now, no conversation about drive-ins is complete without talking about the snack bar. Because here's something most people don't realize, the movie itself was almost secondary, financially speaking. Theater owners paid steep licensing fees to show films, and the ticket revenue barely covered those costs. The real money, the money that kept the lights on, came from the concession stand. Hot dogs. Popcorn. Sodas. Candy bars. The margins on that food were enormous, and smart operators knew it. And so they created something genuinely ingenious, the intermission countdown. Between the first and second feature of a double bill, an animated short would play on the screen. Dancing hot dogs. Smiling boxes of popcorn. A cheerful voice telling you that delicious refreshments were waiting just a short walk away. These little films are so nostalgic now that people collect them, study them, celebrate them, but they were purely calculated advertising, designed to send hundreds of hungry families marching toward the concession windows all at the same time. It worked beautifully. The snack bar wasn't just part of the drive-in experience. It was the economic engine that made the whole thing run. So with all of that going for them, the affordability, the flexibility, the family appeal, the cultural momentum, how on earth did they almost vanish? Let's walk through it, because the story of the decline is just as fascinating as the rise. The first cracks appeared in the early 1960s, and they came from the ground beneath the theaters, quite literally. When drive-ins were built in the late 40s, they were deliberately placed on the cheap outskirts of town. Empty land. Cornfields. The edge of nowhere. But American suburbs didn't stay put. They kept spreading outward, year after year, swallowing up those empty fields and turning them into neighborhoods and shopping centers and office parks. Suddenly, the old drive-in on the edge of town was no longer on the edge of town. It was surrounded. And the land it was sitting on, 10 flat, easily accessible acres sitting right next to a major road, was worth a fortune to developers. Property taxes followed land values upward, and a business that had been built on the economics of cheap land started struggling to meet its tax bills on a seasonal revenue model. Drive-ins, remember, were largely summer operations. They couldn't generate income 12 months a year the way an indoor theater could. Higher taxes hit them disproportionately hard. Then, in 1966, came a blow that almost nobody talks about today but that hit the industry with surprising force. Congress passed the Uniform Time Act, which standardized daylight saving time across the country. Before that law, states and even individual counties had patchwork approaches to the time change. Afterward, summer nights stayed light until nearly 9 o'clock across most of the country. And a drive-in theater cannot start its movie until it's dark. That might sound like a minor inconvenience, but think about the math. You're running a double feature, 2 movies, standard practice at nearly every drive-in in the country. The first film can't start until 9. The second film runs until well past midnight. Suddenly, bringing the kids out on a school night is genuinely irresponsible, and even on a weekend, families with young children have to make hard choices. The leisurely summer evening that the drive-in had been built around just got a lot shorter and a lot less convenient. But the most devastating blows were still coming, and they came from technology. In 1972, HBO launched as the first premium cable television service in the United States. For a monthly fee, you could watch movies at home, recent movies, good movies, without leaving your living room. The audience that had been going to the drive-in precisely because they valued watching films at home in comfort suddenly had a new option that was genuinely competitive. And then, a few years later, came the VCR. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, home video rental had become a phenomenon. For a few dollars, you could take a movie home and watch it on your own schedule, pausing when the baby needed attention, rewinding the good parts, staying in your own pajamas. The drive-in had always sold itself on informality and convenience. Home video did the same thing and did it better, right in your living room, without requiring you to load up the car. At the same time, the indoor theater industry was reinventing itself. The multiplex, a single building housing 4, 6, 8, 10 separate screens, started spreading across the country through the 1970s. These theaters offered staggered start times, meaning you could show up almost whenever you wanted and catch a screening within the hour. They were climate-controlled, immune to weather, and open every single day of the year. They could serve the full spectrum of films simultaneously, from family movies to adult dramas to action pictures. The drive-in, locked into its dusk to midnight weather-dependent window and its 2-feature-per-night format, simply couldn't match any of that flexibility. To their credit, drive-in owners tried to adapt. Some of them began renting out their enormous empty lots during the daytime hours for flea markets and swap meets, a clever bit of thinking that gave them weekend revenue from a property that would otherwise sit empty until sundown. Many upgraded their audio systems, replacing those little crackly window speakers with FM radio broadcasts so that patrons could listen to the film through their own car stereos. It was a genuine improvement, and a lot of drive-ins still use that system today. Some operators leaned into adult programming in the 1970s, scheduling more provocative films that couldn't play at indoor theaters in their communities. That brought in revenue for a time, but it fundamentally changed what the drive-in stood for, and it alienated the family audience that had been the backbone of the business since its beginning. By the mid-1980s, the closures had become a steady drumbeat. One by one, operators looked at their numbers, the rising property taxes, the shrinking crowds, the shorter viable season, the competition from cable and VHS and the multiplex down the road, and they made the same rational economic calculation that so many of them reached independently. The most valuable thing they owned wasn't the projector or the screen or the snack bar. It was the land. Sell it to a developer, and you could retire comfortably. Hold on and fight the tide, and you'd spend the next decade struggling toward an increasingly uncertain future. The screens came down. The lots were graded. The strip malls and subdivisions rose in their place. And yet, and this is the part of the story that I find genuinely moving, they didn't all die. About 300 drive-ins are still operating in the United States today, and in recent years, something interesting has been happening. Younger audiences, people who never experienced the original golden era, are discovering them with fresh eyes. They're showing up not because drive-ins are the cheapest or most convenient option, but because they understand what those original patrons understood in 1955. There is something irreplaceable about watching a movie under an open sky, surrounded by the sounds of summer, in the company of the people you love most. The pandemic, of all things, gave drive-ins a small but meaningful moment of renewal. When indoor venues closed, the drive-in was suddenly one of the only places where people could gather and share an experience while maintaining distance. A new generation pulled into those gravel lots, hung their phones on the window instead of metal speakers, and got it, maybe for the first time, maybe without even realizing they were participating in something that stretched back decades through American life. The drive-in theater is one of those cultural artifacts that tells you something true about the country that produced it. It was born from the marriage of two things Americans have always loved, the automobile and the movies. It thrived because it understood that people want to enjoy things on their own terms, in their own space, without being told how to dress or how to behave or when to go home. It declined because the same forces that shaped American life in the second half of the 20th century, suburban expansion, tax pressure, technological disruption, the endless search for convenience, reshaped it in ways that left very little room for a seasonal, weather-dependent, land-intensive operation built on the economics of a different era. But 300 of them are still out there. Still popping up their screens as the sun goes down on a summer Friday. Still selling popcorn and hot dogs to families who are, in that moment, part of a living thread that runs all the way back to a man named Hollingshead and a sheet nailed to some trees in New Jersey in 1933. If there's one near you, and there might be, even if you don't know it, go. Take someone you love. Roll the windows down. And remember what it felt like when the whole country used to do this together. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more stories about the places, things, and moments that made America what it is, subscribe and come along for the ride. There's plenty more where this came from.